Good morning. My name is Chris Lennon. Today, I'm the worship coordinator. My pronouns are he, him, and his. Welcome to our virtual service here at First Parish in Plymouth. For today's service, Paul Melville is our technical director. And our service today will be led by our minister, Art Lavoie. The recorded portion of our services will stop before we have our candles of joy and sorrow. Whoever you are, whoever you love, wherever you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here at First Parish. Here we go. For the call to worship this morning, we have "And So I Say" by Elizabeth Tarbox. And so I say, ours is a story of faith and hope and love. I say it is our need for one another that binds us together, that brings us laughing and limping into relationships, and keeps us at it when we otherwise might despair at the fix we are in. I say it is the holy we need, the eternal beyond our comprehension, and one place we can find it is here, working and worshiping together. And I say there is a transcendent value worthy of our loyalty, upon which we may have our hearts, and its divine manifestation is love. Beautiful words. I don't have the opening hymn in front of me. Maybe Sandy could lead us into that, announce it for us.
Yep, we're singing 346, Come Sing a Song With Me.
Oh, my favorite.
Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song
Good morning. I'm the Reverend Arthur Lavoie. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I'm delighted to welcome you here this morning. Please join me in the words of our chalice lighting, which is on your screen. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, to speak the truth in love, and to help one another.
This month, we're talking about love and all of its different facets. This week, the families got a package. They were asked a few questions to talk about together. Who makes you feel loved? Who do you show your love to well? Who needs more love? Who is it hard to love? Who makes it easy to love them? I found a story about love. It's called Canon in D with a Side of Tomato Soup. It's by Rachel Printy. Paul stared with his wife across the table, noticing for the first time that her sweater was on inside out. Every morning he would lay out her clothes on the bed in a specific order, so she'd know which item to put on first. But it didn't guarantee how Elaine would put each item on. He'd have to pay more attention before they went out the door. Their usual waitress, Sarah, appeared holding a tray with 2 sweet teas on it when they reached the restaurant. How y'all doing today? With Alzheimer's disease, there were good days, and then there were challenging days. It was one of the latter. Elaine was preoccupied scrubbing a stain on the wooden table with her finger, forgetting it was a permanent fixture of the booth they go to every week. They'd been lunching at this diner for years. That blemish had been there since day one. Today's actually a very special day for us. It's our 57th wedding anniversary. His wife stopped fidgeting and looked up. The day she took a chance on a broken fellow by saying, "I do," he said with a wink in her direction. "It is?" Elaine asked. "Yep, sweetheart, it is." "Congratulations, you two. Miss Sue fixed up some of her special key lime pie today. I'll make sure you get a slice to take home. Are you sticking with the Cobb salad and tomato soup?" "That's it," said Paul. She nodded and turned and then swung around. "I just remembered, we're out of tomato soup as of about an hour ago. Chicken noodle okay?" Paul looked at his wife, now scrubbing away the stain again with the napkin. "Elaine." She said, focused on the table. "They're out of soup. Do you want chicken soup or a sandwich instead?" She looked confused, so he pointed to the menu and showed her a few other options he thought she might enjoy. But she was having a hard time picking something now. She scrubbed the spot even harder. It was not going well. So they had to change the plan. He packed her up. He apologized. He said they had to leave the restaurant. And he walked out. They came back home after a long, stressful drive and settled back into the living room. He went to the kitchen to find some soup at home, and he found a can of tomato soup. He walked past the cabinets labeled bowls, plates, mugs, glasses, and cereal to get things out. Everything was labeled so Elaine could stay as independent as long as possible. He carefully lowered 2 bowls, aware of his arthritic hands, and filled them with the liquid contents before putting Elaine's dish in the microwave. As he stood there watching the timer count down, the sound of Pachelbel floated into the kitchen. His wife had been a music teacher, so they always had a piano in the living room. She hadn't played much lately, though. He suspected it's because she now had difficulty sight reading the music. Walking back into the room, he found Elaine bent over the piano, playing Canon in D from muscle memory. He was struck at how her fingers, still so capable and sure, glided over the keys. An image of her coming down the aisle towards him in a stunning white dress filled his head. Those same lovely hands holding a bouquet of yellow daisies. It had been a simple wedding, but that's what they wanted. A tear ran down his face. He waited until she finished before taking a seat beside her on the bench. Bringing the back of her hand to his mouth, he planted a kiss as she beamed with that same beautiful grin she had on their wedding day. "My favorite song," he whispered, choking up. She gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "That's why I played it for you." "I love you, Paul." "I love you so much," he said. "Now, would you like to share some tomato soup with me?" Her face fell a little. "I was hoping for chicken noodle, but it's okay. I'll have tomato."
Okay, today's reading, Grim Stories from Asylum Seekers by Sarah Towell. A few dozen men and women shuffled up the stairs to the Boeing 767, lashed in 5-point restraints, ankles bound and cuffs joined by thick chains, wrists manacled, and the whole rig secured to metal belts draped heavily around each waist. Frightened, depressed, and faint from lack of food and water, one of the men, a Cameroonian singer, tripped and fell. A cadre of armed guards immediately swarmed him. They pulled me across the tarmac, sat me on my back, and stuffed me into a sack, said the man. According to the Cameroonian singer and 2 men who said they were eyewitnesses, the guards immobilized his already hobbled legs, wrapping them in a stiff black blanket and compressing them at the ankles, knees, and thighs with a series of yellow seatbelt type straps. They enveloped his chained upper body in an armless vest clipped tightly at the back. Then they folded him like a sandwich, he says, leaning on his back to press his face to his knees. They cinched his chest at a 30-degree angle to his legs, which were held fast by a strap hooked to a ring, the onlookers say. 6 guards carried the singer onto the plane and dumped him, like a load of wood, across 3 seats, he says. They left him forcefully bent and gasping for air for what might have been hours, he says, relaxing his restraints only after the plane hit cruising altitude far above the clouds. He and the rest of the bound and shackled were being returned to Cameroon, Angola, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, places they had fled as long as 4 years prior after experiencing political persecution. The 5 passengers I communicated with from that November flight say they were coerced, though some combination of beating, choking, shaming, brute force, being pepper sprayed in the eyes, tasing, and the threats thereof, into signing their own travel papers. 13 others from a similar journey in October, 8 of whom are now party to a legal complaint, tell much the same story. These alleged depredations, which the government calls unsubstantiated, did not take place in Iraq or Chechnya or Afghanistan. The Fettered were neither terrorists nor criminals. This allegedly happened in Louisiana and Texas, and the victims' only offense appears to have been that they sought asylum in Donald Trump's America.
Hungering for answers in my time. I am balanced on the brink of wisdom. I'm impatient to receive a sign. I move forward with my senses open. In perfection it will be my crime. In humility I will listen. We're all swimming to the other side. On this journey through thoughts and feelings, finding intuition, my head, my heart. I am gathering the tools together. I'm preparing to do my part. All of those who have come before me, band together and be my guide. Loving lessons that I will follow. We're all swimming to the other side.
Most of the years I lived in Dorchester and was the minister there, I was married to a man named Mark, who was of Japanese American heritage. He would often be asked the question, "Where are you from?" Mark loved messing with people when asked this question. People were always expecting that he would name some Asian country. And he would always answer by saying, "Oh, I was born in a little town called Los Angeles." That often confused the questioner a bit, who might say, "A little town called Los Angeles," to which Mark would respond, "Yeah, Los Angeles, the one in California." The questioner would often then ask a little uncomfortably, "Where were your parents born?" To which Mark would honestly respond, "Well, my father was also born in Los Angeles, and my mother was born on a farm near Seattle, Washington. My parents met as teenagers in one of the Japanese internment camps during World War II." At this point, the questioner would look very embarrassed and confused. They had gotten the answer to their underlying question, that Mark was of Japanese heritage, but they also got a whole lot more than they bargained for. If I were within earshot of this conversation, I would jump in at this point and say, Mark's family has been in the United States longer than most of mine. If that is the measure of belonging, then he is more of an American than I am. And by the way, I never get asked the question, where are you from? Where are you from? That's a powerful question that often implies more than a curiosity about the other person. Think about it. Most of us who are Caucasian never get asked that question, unless we're in a foreign country, perhaps. Or if we are asked, it is part of a larger conversation where both parties are sharing stories about our heritage or our families of origin. It's generally not a question we ask unless the person is clearly different from us, different from what we perceive to be the norm. Some of the underlying assumptions that often go along with that question are, well, you look or sound different from me, and since I am Caucasian and the norm, I'm implying that you are not from here and that perhaps you don't belong here. Or we might be saying, I'd like to know where you're from so I can categorize you in an appropriate box with all of the assumptions that go along with that. And if I can categorize you, I will feel more safe interacting with you. This is really about me. Your comfort and safety are of little importance. In an article several years ago in the UU World magazine, Betty Sidan, an African-American woman, recounted an experience she had in her UU church. When the young man sitting next to me at the choir rehearsal turned and said, "Thank you for singing with us." I knew he meant well, she continued, but his use of the word us stunned me. I had been a member of that church choir since its very first rehearsal many years before he came to the church. I had been a Unitarian Universalist since before he was born. But in his eyes, I was not us. Perhaps he thought I was a member of the Baptist or Methodist church in the neighborhood of our downtown congregation. We do this all the time. It's a gift of our analytical, reasoning minds to try to categorize people and things we see around us. It's a curse of our more primitive emotional and psychological natures to try to separate people into friend and foe, those who are part of our tribe and those who are not. I get it. At one time in our past, we had to protect ourselves from those who were different from us, those who belonged to another clan or tribe, those who might intend to harm us or steal our food and resources. Intellectually, we know that's not who we are anymore, even though we might have that initial emotional reaction. The assumptions we make about people often push people away and are not welcoming and inclusive. That's by design. When we make these kinds of assumptions, our intent is to create a barrier of sorts. We don't want to know people for who they are. We want to give them a label and then attach to them all of our preconceived ideas about anyone with that label. In the sermon this morning, I'm particularly lifting up our struggles with being more inclusive of people from different racial and cultural backgrounds, but the same also applies to others who are different, and to LGBTQ folks toward whom some of our assumptions may be more deeply hidden. In this morning's reading, I'm sure it might have been difficult to hear about the abusive treatment of people at our southern border. The separation of families is a horror that's been well documented. We've all heard parts of that story. But the treatment of asylum seekers was appalling to me when I read it in the Boston Globe last month. Please remember that these are not people who have illegally crossed our border. These are people who followed the appropriate protocols and arrived at a border crossing station seeking political asylum. They had fled countries of origin because of threats of violence and death, and were seeking a safe haven, a sanctuary here. Even though they followed all the rules, they were still thrown into detention and treated brutally. As individuals and as Euro-Americans, we always feared violence from the outside, from people who are different from us. But we also discount our own violent behavior toward others. We rationalize it and dehumanize them to the extent that we begin to think that for some reason, they deserve the violence that we perpetrate. Mostly, I think, we are afraid. As a species that actually has the ability to think and reason for ourselves, we know that change and difference are constants that permeate our lives. I've never understood, though, why we are so afraid of that very change and of that very difference. Why do we seem to want to close ourselves off from others? We create gated communities to protect us from what exactly? In fact, with this southern border wall, we seem to want to turn the whole country into one giant gated community. What are we so afraid of? I think there are underlying issues of power and control that operate here. Perhaps it's because we are so aware in our psyches of the changing nature of our lives. We long for some stability, and that translates as control over our existence. The more insecure we are, the more we may want to have power over other people and things that might challenge us. And the more we recognize that our culture is changing and that those of us who are Caucasian will no longer be the majority, the more threatened some of us feel. We do long for connection with others, but those connections are sensitive and fragile things. They can be easily damaged and broken. Having a measure of power and control in these connections, in these relationships, helps us to feel more safe, especially with people who are different from us. I understand. Perhaps, though, it is better to allow ourselves to be a bit more vulnerable so that these connections can be more authentic and more real. So here are a few things I have learned to help make myself more open, to help myself not to make immediate judgments and put people into boxes without taking the time to know them. This is not an exhaustive list by any imagination, And I welcome hearing how you handle these sensitive connections. I'd like to ask that this be our coffee hour conversation starter today. How do you change your language and thinking so that you can be more inclusive, more welcoming of others? I found that it's important to use open-ended questions and statements that avoid judgment or our attempt to categorize people. Thank you for singing with us could become, I don't think we've had the chance to meet. How long have you been singing with the choir? Where are you from? Can be, it's nice to meet you. What brought you here today? This might be how we learn something about another person in a more welcoming and inclusive way. In encountering other people, especially those we don't know, open-hearted listening is the most important way to build connection and make people feel welcome and included. We don't have to wow them with our knowledge and our opinions. Asking a question about some shared experience goes much further than offering our own ideas. What did you think of the service today? To someone at church, or what has living in Plymouth been like for you? To someone we see in the community. Betty Saigan says in her article that we need to change the way we look at people if we're going to be more welcoming in our lives. She writes, our culture and our message may not appeal to everyone, but we need to recognize that there are people like us, Unitarian Universalists, in every community. If we can look in the faces of people whose physical appearance is very different from us and honestly say, I can see my mother, my father, my sister, my brother, my aunt, my uncle, my cousin, my friend, that maybe we can survive in a multicultural world. Most of the time, we do a great job welcoming people here at First Parish in Plymouth. But as we continue to grow and we see more and more people that we don't know as well, it's important for all of us to work a bit harder to build a beloved community for ourselves and for others. January 20th was a historic day in American history. Yes, many of us are pleased that Joe Biden was sworn in as our president. But what will truly make history is that the first woman, the first Black person, and the first person of South Asian heritage, Kamala Harris, was sworn in as vice president. There was another significant history-making event that happened that afternoon that I watched on TV and cried, I'll have to say. I'm reminded here of various jokes that begin with the words, 3 men walk into a bar. But in this case, we had 3 men who walked into the US Senate chamber. Alex Padilla, a Latino man who was chosen by California's governor to replace Kamala Harris, a senator from California, as senator for California, and Reverend Raphael Warnock, a Black man, and John Ossoff, a Jew. All 3 walked into the US Senate and were sworn into office by that very same Black South Asian woman who is our new vice president. So 3 men, a Black man, a Latino, and a Jew, walk into the US Senate to be sworn in. And the joke is on anyone who thinks that progress won't happen. The joke is on anyone who can't celebrate the glorious, diverse changes that are finally happening in our country. The journey is far from over, and the road will likely, unfortunately, be paved with continued hate and violence. But a new day may finally be dawning in America, one filled with the hope and the divine manifestation of love that Elizabeth Tarbox wrote of in our call to worship. Amen, and blessed be. Please join us in singing, Answering the Call to Love. We are answering the call of love. As Unitarian Universalists, that is the call of the Universalist part of our heritage. We gather in love and in hope and in faith, and we share that with those around us and with our communities. In this month that we celebrate beloved community, on this day that we celebrate the call to love in all of its forms, we recommit ourselves to answering that call and to the struggle and the risk and the sometimes uncomfortable feelings that will happen as we take those steps to answer the call of love every day. Amen, and blessed be.